Hey traders, Cousin Benny coming to you from theclosingprint.com on July the 12th with a video on the number one question that new traders send to me on a weekly basis. How can I find setups that will be in the top performing groups with the best price entry in a sustainable uptrend? And how can I tell if I am entering at the right time? They go on to ask me, how can I increase my odds of a favorable outcome and increase my edge as a trader? Well, the number one method I use, aside from our Bollinger Band scan, which is really to find candidates, is to use what I call the box trade. Now with the box trade setup, let's go to our sectors and I'll show you what the box trade is. You can also check out the video I have on YouTube, which I'll post a link to here, which you can go to after the video and reference for a more detailed explanation. Basically with the box trade we have a 10 period EMA and a 30 period moving average that we trade off of. The idea is when the 10 period EMA is above the 30 period moving average, we go long, and when the 10 period EMA is below the 30 period, as you see here on the banking index, we only go short. We short when we move into this zone that's created by the two moving averages. Now, if we look at the sectors that I have here, the banking index moved off of a high that we saw recently at 72.55. So we're not interested in this particular sector because the MACD is moving lower. Stochastics is oversold and getting ready to turn. However, we're watching this possible crossover to the downside. Biotech, we see a similar circumstance. We have a lower high and we see our moving averages moving lower. We're looking for the best setups for the week ahead. Now with gold, this is a very compelling chart. We have a break of a downtrend. We have a crossover of the 10 period above the 30 period moving average. So we're already starting to set up a box trade to the long side on gold. We'll look at that sector in detail in a minute. Looking at housing, we broke down. We're not interested here. The real estate shares, we've been on a tear for a long time, so we probably think this particular index is overbought and extended. You can see that we are in a very large cup and handle situation. We could break higher, so we will watch the IYR real estate shares going forward. We look like we could bounce off of the moving average here. We talked about REITs last week, and the compelling issue here is whether or not TNX, the 10-year yield, continues to move lower. But continuing with our thesis here, let's move to IYT, the transportation shares. We see a nice uptrend, and every time we move down into this zone, it was a buy area. When we see our first green candle after a move down into this zone, we buy that. So we could see a move here of approximately $6 in this particular move. Looking at the weekly chart, we can see the IYT is somewhat extended. So we probably wouldn't want to trade this going forward if we're looking for an edge. Sticking with the thesis, KRE, the regional banks, we can see the same thing. We're looking for a crossover to the downside. So we're not interested here unless we're thinking short. Semiconductors, we're extended, but we came down and notice how we moved down into this zone and we bought that green candle, and now we're a little bit higher. MACD and stochastics looks like it could resolve a little bit better before we took a trade. Let's take a look at the weekly. Very extended here. So I wouldn't take a trade on semiconductors this week because it's not a compelling advantage for me to take trades in the semiconductors at this particular moment in time. When we're back here close to the moving average, what the market is deeming fair value, then I would take a trade and we could see this nice increase. But for the time being, semiconductors don't look compelling as an edge. The steel index, we're in this nice triangle pattern. Perhaps we have something here to work off of. We have a crossover here. We have a move back down below. The 10 period is down below the 30, so we're not long here, we're short. And we're just watching for a resolution, being prices are moving sideways. We look like we could break to the upside on the steel index, so we'll watch components like AKS Steel and US Steel as well as STLD for possible trades in the near future. XLB looks good, but let's take a look at the weekly. Looks pretty extended to me. I don't think I would take a trade on XLB at the moment, although it is grinding higher. Not a compelling edge. Moving along, let's take a look at our last sectors here. XLE, energy sector has already started to move lower, and we could possibly see a crossover to the downside and the start of a bearish trend on XLE after a nice run that we saw for some time going back to the summer of 2012, where XLE just took off to the upside. Now we could see a move down to the moving average here, whether you use the 10 or the 13 EMA on the weekly. I would watch for resolution here at these EMAs on the energy shares. For now, I wouldn't trade this sector. With XLF financials, we look like we're holding up here in a nice pattern. We're holding this low with a higher low. So let's take a look at the weekly. And we're just grinding along since 2012 at $12.79. We've almost doubled since that time. Okay, not really compelling. I'm looking for more of a pullback on XLF, and that's just me. XLI, the industrials, a nice descending channel pattern here. MACD is pulling back. We could see resolution to the upside, and we see stochastics with the triple bottom here and a possible crossover to the upside. Let's take a look at the weekly. We're extended when you see the length of this trend. XLK, technology sector, looks pretty good. Let's take a look at the weekly. So we have gold, we have XLI, and we have the steel index. Well, we're still extended here, so we could see a pullback still before the fall of this year, going into the year as a setup. Know where stochastics is on the weekly and the MACD, we could pull back. So this isn't really compelling for an edge for a new trader. It's XLK. XLP, consumer staples, we're trying for a new high, but we are extended all the way back from February lows at $39. We look pretty good here, but we are overbought and could see a move lower. So continuing with XLU, we were looking at this last week. Some things were setting up. We possibly could see a turn in MACD on XLU. Let's take a look at the weekly. We're in a long-term uptrend, so just keep that in mind. We have this break here, pull back to breakout at the 10 period EMA, and we moved higher, and we're continuing to hold that line going into the end of the year. However, we do see a MACD cross, and stochastics could pull back for a better setup with a box trade into this zone right here. So let's go back to our gold shares, which we saw a very good setup, and we put together some stocks here that we'll look at. Now with gold, the nice thing here is that with Barrick Gold we have a nice downtrend that we broke. Now we have a crossover to the upside, and shares are continuing to move higher. Let's take a look at the weekly, and we can see the reverse of all of the other sectors where we had this huge move to the upside. Gold has been on a downtrend for some time. However, note where the moving averages are, and prices were starting to move above the moving averages. So this is looking very compelling as an edge going into the end of the year as a possible trade on the gold shares. Moving to our next chart, Inigo Mining. We can see AEM has broken out of a nice downtrend. Prices were moving sideways. We had two crosses on the 10 period and 30 period. Now that shares are above the 10 period EMA and the 30 period, we continue to stay long on Inigo Mining. Franco-Nevada, we saw a nice breakout of a wedge pattern. We had a crossover here in June, and now we see a nice uptrend. Goldfields, we see a nice break to the downside of this ascending channel pattern, a crossover, so we were bearish here. Now we see a crossover to the upside. We see a move back down into the box trade zone. And now we buy the first green candle and we're up 20-30 cents. We're flagging now and we should see higher prices on GFI. Note RSI and also note where Stochastics was leading MACD. MACD is continuing to move higher. Goldcorp, we had this nice descending wedge pattern, crossover, much the same as we saw here on Goldfields. Cross to the upside, we had a flag moving higher, came back down to the 10 period. You buy the first green candle. Now we're flagging above this area here. We created the pivot zone and now we should see higher prices with a crossover on MACD and Stochastics starting to wind down. Now we're going to watch for Stochastics to turn back up and MACD as well to reset before we would get into Goldfields. Rand Gold Resources, descending channel, descending wedge, crossover to the upside. Now we see a bullish pattern. Let's take a look at the weekly and I'll show you again. Converse to all the other sectors that were moving higher that people keep continuing to buy to the upside. Who's going to get caught in the last chair on the musical chairs on the Titanic? Okay, we have descending pattern here that's breaking to the upside. Look at these. Look at this support and resistance zone that prices are moving above. Rand Gold Resources looks very good on the weekly basis as it does on the daily basis. Now we see a compelling edge here starting to emerge. Goro Gold Resource Corp. We have pivots here. We're beating up against this level here. We could see this move higher with RSI continuing to bounce off the 50 level. This week we could see a move higher. Stochastics is recycled. We got MACD starting to turn and we're starting to see volume. Helica Mining. We saw a move down into the box zone here. We buy the first green candle. We're still haven't got stopped out below this level here. Remember, our stops are always the day preceding. If we entered here and prices move higher, our stop is now below this candle here. In the case of $3.20, we'd probably have a stop 50 cents below this, or around the 30-period moving average, whichever you're most comfortable with. But for the most part, Helica Mining should continue to move higher and test these recent highs back in February. That's not a promise, it's just what I'm visualizing as we go into this trade, looking for an edge for a new trader. Sticking with the thesis, Harmony Gold. Descending channel pattern, crossover to the upside. We have a change of trend. Prices broke above this trend line, and now we're starting to see the 10 period above the 30, and prices continuing to move higher. MACD is moving higher as well as Stochastic. iShares Silver Trust. A lot of the mining companies like Freeport-McMoRan and others that also trade or also mine silver, you should watch these stocks as well. Crossover, break of trend, and now prices are flagging out and moving higher. Stochastics is moving higher as well as MACD. Kinross Gold. We have a nice descending wedge pattern here, break of a pivot and trend line. We came back and tested that. We should see higher prices. It's not a guarantee again. We could drop down into this zone one more time and then move higher, but RSIs continue to move higher as well as Stochastics turning back up. MUX, McEwen Mining. Downtrend, broke trend, crossover, flag pattern, moving along the 10 period. Now we're starting to move higher as well. Note RSI. Stochastics recycled, led MACD higher, and now we're starting to see a better price action. Newmont Mining, this one tends to be a little more sluggish, only because it's a much bigger company. But you can see that moving sideways, we had a crossover here, and we're holding the 10 period. It looks like we're going to break out this week at the 26.47 level. A break above 26.50 would be a long. On our part, Stochastics leading MACD. Let's take a look at the weekly. The weekly, look at the long downtrend here, and prices along with the moving average starting to move above the 30 period. So we are long now. Look at the volume here. Price action is looking very good on Newmont on the daily and the weekly. We have a sideways base here, I also posted a few other blog posts where I talked about the difference when I talked about the phases a stock goes through. On a weekly basis, this is phase 4. Phase 1 is where you start to establish a base, and phase 2 is when prices start to move to the upside and you start to see accumulation. This is distribution, this is accumulation, and this is the markup period when prices start to move higher. Look for that in anything that you take when you're looking for an edge as a new trader. PVG, Pretium Resources, looks pretty good, moving above this breakout level here, and you can see a crossover to the upside. We retested that, and now we're continuing to move higher. Let's take a look at the weekly. We had a crossover, we had the test, green candle, and at 613 you're up almost 50% at the $9 share mark. Now there were a number of other traders, two that I remember, I think it was Chart Smarter, that made a mention about mining shares last week. We also saw JNUG, which we'll check in a minute, which JNUG came up on our scan a week ago. We started to notice that mining shares were starting to turn. Descending channel here, crossover to the upside, a little bit more weak on this. It's a cheap stock, so I would expect that. Thinly traded, 200,000 shares, but still, keeping with the trend of gold shares, changing trend and possibly starting to move higher. We're still higher low from this low at $1.11 to the current low. We could see a move higher on this cheap stock, RIC, Richmont Mining. Vista Gold, downtrend since February highs. We have a crossover. We broke trend, came back down and tested the trend line. Now we're starting to move higher. First green candle right here. We didn't get stopped out. We didn't get down below this level here at 45 cents. This is a penny stock, obviously, and should continue to see higher prices. This is something that you could throw, say, 1,000 shares at, and as maybe 1% of your trading capital for a lottery ticket to the upside with all the gold shares moving higher as well. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at. This is Cousin Vinny coming to you from theclosingprint.com. Come and check out our blog as well, where we post trades and watch lists on a daily basis that you can trade off of. This is something that I'm putting together for new traders as one method to find setups and look for a better edge in your trading going forward. So what if you enter a trade in an industry that is increasingly bought by institutions as they take profits in other industries, right? And put money to work in industries that are seeing the greatest increase in accumulation. Well, one thing that I didn't mention was something that I wanted to point out that Mikey and I do on a regular basis. He sends me information about the shares and companies that are doing well. So if you subscribe to Investors Business Daily, you can check out what the major industry groups are and what their current rank is. If you look at the top 10 industries here, you look at where they were 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and this week, look where gold and mining shares are. They were 73 6 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, they moved up to 26. And this past week, they're number 1, gold and mining shares. So keep in mind, if you watch these top 10 industries, computer hardware peripherals, if you're looking at Triple D, that's one that's starting to look good as well. You could find trades that will fit your criteria and have an edge going into your trading. Now, if we look at Triple D, I mentioned this last week in our top 25 movers and shakers. We looked at stocks that saw a Bollinger Band squeeze and are moving higher. But Bollinger Bands are pretty expanded here, so I would see these move back closer together, start to squeeze again, volatility trail off, and shares stay in this price range before they set up again. So let's take a look at this list and look at Triple D. Looking at Triple D, we can see that it pulled back to a breakout area here. If we look at the box setup on this particular company, we can see that we pulled, here we go. We got a downtrend line here. We have phase 4, distribution, phase 1, moving sideways, basing, accumulation. Now we're starting to see a box set up, and prices have, the 10 period is now above the 30 period, so we're long, and we're looking for prices to move back above the 10 period and continue their venture north. So with the box trade set up, look for a visual edge going into your trading week. So again, this is Cousin Vinny coming to you from theclosingprint.com. This is our blog where we post setups during the week from the scans that we produce on a daily basis. Okay? Take care. I hope this helps, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll probably do another video. I'll probably create another video for Sunday going into the trading week. I'll be back in the office on Monday. Take care.